Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. We talk a lot about narratives and stories on the podcast. Narratives and stories that we tell ourselves. These can be in the forms of beliefs and our mindsets and how we see reality. But they're effectively these narratives that we've got going on in our minds that once we have a narrative going on, we have a tendency to then look for evidence of that narrative in the outside world because we're trying to confirm these narratives and stories that we tell about ourselves or about other people or about the world. But we notice that there's something else going on as well beyond just simple narratives and stories. And that's what we're starting to call, between the two of us, between you and me, Joel, scripts. Scripts are a little different than narratives and stories. Scripts are more like these compulsions to play out a scenario or to play out a concept about who we think we are. And the script is usually an attempt to find or experience an emotion that we're looking for. And what will happen, or our observation is that what will happen is when the person or an individual, including myself, is trying to get an emotional experience and is not able to find it, is not able to call up that emotion that they're looking for, they get focused, maybe hyper-focused, maybe even obsessed with playing out this script, because the script is how they know to get to that emotional experience, to get that emotion sated, whatever that is. Now, that's pretty heady and pretty abstract, but we're going to give some examples on, or maybe some illustrations of what that script can look like and ways to maybe divorce ourselves from having to play these scripts out in our own lives, while at the same time holding space for other people's scripts and allowing them to play their scripts out so they can get out of that fixation. Yeah,
just a couple days ago, I've struggled with anxiety in my life to motivate myself. One of the ways I motivate myself is I'll fall back on this. Well, if I don't get this done, this person might be upset, or this thing won't happen. And so I've often used this emotion of anxiety to motivate me doing things. The other day we had this, I consider it a pretty epic argument. We had a big disagreement. And I'm like, we have to get this done. It's almost the end of the year and we've got to do this and this. And I'm really anxious. If we don't do it in this timeline, it's going to cause all this problem. And I'm creating all of this emotion around trying to get things accomplished. And you're like upset and you're saying, I'm not going to handle any more of this anxiety to motivate us. I'm like, but if I don't have this anxiety, I'm an emotional person. I have to have this to motivate. And we're having this back and forth. And it comes down to, I'm visibly upset. I'm standing and I'm raising my voice. And finally I stop and I go, wait a minute. She's right. I'm using anxiety to push myself here. And it's this little script I've got running. I feel like I've got to have this emotion play through me in order to accomplish things. And I've used it as a strategy for so long when I'm under the gun, under timelines, and under pressure, that I'm falling back on it to feel this emotion of anxiety, to fuel something that I want to do in the world. And as we were unpacking this and talking about it, finally I in the middle of me like raising my voice and standing up, I'm like, you know what? You're right. We sat down. It was like another hour of unpacking what was going on for us emotionally. And, I apologized for raising my voice and all this, and came down to the fact that this is not a healthy way that I'm using this script to get things done. It's not a healthy way that I'm engaging with my emotions to move forward in things. And it's something I pulled on so long, it's almost unconscious for me. It's almost like I'm addicted to that script, that emotion, to that usefulness of that to get things accomplished when I'm under the gun. And I don't even think about it. I just automatically go there from years of doing it.
Yeah. Well, and I think a script is different than a narrative or a story, because I don't think you have any narrative around your identity and anxiety being a part of who you are.
No. And it doesn't really come up unless I'm like under pressure. Like if we're behind on something, or it's the end of the year and, my boys are coming to visit and we got to get stuff accomplished. It's definitely a script that starts to run unconsciously almost for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I have these little scripts too. I'm not as good at identifying my scripts as you are, which is why I'm always like in awe of your ability to observe this. And I think it's because these scripts are generally associated with an emotion that that a person wants to feel. I can see my scripts coming up in things like wanting to feel like I'm useful and valuable. And so there's no narrative necessarily that I have attached to specific, usefulness. I just want to feel the expression of usefulness. So when I enter a situation, some of my scripts get triggered in the sense that I want to now show up as being a valuable person, and I'll start launching into. And I've gotten really good at not making it so obvious when I'm trying to establish value and worth in a situation. So I'm really good at establishing value and worth to, say, a new group of people without it being like really obvious bid for that. So it's difficult to point out because I'm savvy enough to know that if you like show up constantly trying to prove that you have value and worth, then people are smart enough to recognize that, and then they assume that you're actually low status or don't have any value or worth because you're so insecure to try to establish that. So a long time ago, I realized that, and so I got really good at being very subtle about it. And yet, it's a feeling that I'm looking for, so I start running these scripts in new situations where I'm trying to establish my value and my worth to a group of people who may not know me. And it's taken a long time to remove those scripts from my dialogue. Like I'm just running it through because I'm looking for that moment when the person like goes, "Oh wow, that's really impressive." And as soon as I get that hit of going like, "Okay, I'm all right. People see me as valuable. I can rest now. I'll be okay." Once I play the script through and I get the hit of that emotion that I was looking for, then suddenly the narratives and stories just go away because I got the hit of the emotion. And I think that's the difference between these narratives and beliefs and big stories and like these ideas of who we are and our egos. These scripts are just like little autoresponder sequences that kick on in order to feel an emotion that we believe we have to feel in order to be okay. It's like this baseline, and these scripts are little strategies that we've come up with over time. And much like myself in figuring out how to get my script running in the most proficient and leveraged way possible, it seems to me that other people get really good at their little scripts too. They get really good at knowing how they played the script out enough times so that they get really good at doing it without being able to be called on it. Like in a really subtle, nuanced way, in a way that's very elegant. They get to run these scripts out, and most people don't have the ability to go, you're basically looking for an emotion right now. You have to get really good at even observing that the scripts are happening before you can start pointing them out, especially because people get so good at running them through.
Yeah, it's almost like for me, I look at it as almost like substance abuse, an addiction per se. Like I have an emotion, like let's talk about the emotion I was talking about just a few minutes ago, this emotion of anxiety to fuel action. I'm almost addicted to that emotion at this point. Like I'm looking at that after we had this conversation, I'm going, I think I've been really relying on this in a strategy so much. The script is almost like a drink of alcohol or a drug or something else that gets me to that emotion I want. Just like if you want to, if you have social anxiety or something and you take a couple shots of alcohol to loosen yourself up at a party, you're basically using a substance to feel an emotion, to feel free, to feel more comfortable. You're using that to get to an emotion that you want to experience in the moment. And this is basically what we're talking about. We're talking about using these scripts, these little already built-in patterns of how we think and how we go about things that give us that little emotional dopamine hit or that little emotional hit or whatever it is that's useful for us out of that emotion. It's like we're addicted to that, and that script is the way we get that drug. That's how we release that emotion for ourselves. And I think it can be very intoxicating. And in fact, in the conversation we were having, the moment you called me on it was when I actually got upset. That's when I stood up and was like, how am I going to get anything done if I don't use emotions, anxiety, and then I'm starting to pull on personality type. I'm a feeler, and so I have to have emotion. I'm really upset, and I'm going, wait a minute, I'm acting like an addict right now. I'm acting like somebody that has something, a substance that is going to get taken away from them, and I'm getting grabby. And instantly I thought, that is not healthy. Like, that's not a good thing for me. And that's when it came to light that I'm using this little script to get to that emotion, and it's like a drug. It's literally like an addiction that maybe I was aware of, but I wasn't realizing just how much I'm going there on a regular basis to get things done. And I have all these stories around how useful it is. Look at all the stuff I get done when I'm anxious. Look at all the things I can accomplish. Look how much I can, under a pinch, I can bring on that anxiety, and I can put myself in a position to paint myself in a corner where I have to get things accomplished. I've got to get things managed. And I'm realizing that, man, that is not healthy at all. You're smiling. That is not healthy at all in that regard. So I think that if you look at this in your life as you're listening, are there things that you're doing, these little, almost like little pills you're taking or drugs you're taking to get to that emotion? When I say drugs or pills, I don't mean literal. I mean these little scripts of how you're behaving or how you're seeing things play out.
Yeah, what's funny is that you said that once the script was threatened, all of a sudden you had a story around it.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think we really have a lot of stories around the scripts until the script is threatened. Then suddenly the stories and narratives come out for why it's necessary and, a required part of who we are. But I don't think that the scripts necessarily already come packaged with stories. Maybe they're parts of stories or parts of narratives, but I think the scripts themselves are, like you said, it's like a shot of alcohol. It's just a tiny little thing, a little script, like a little autoresponder, a little way of seeing reality or doing things, or, basically a moment of well-worn autopilot behavior, something that you've done over and over and over that has gotten you that result that you want, which is that whatever emotion you're chasing at the moment, whatever emotion makes you feel okay. And then once the script is played out, like, you just abandon it. Like, you don't, like, once the shot of alcohol has been taken, it's not like you carry the bottle around with you for the rest of the day. It's just like you got that shot, and so you're good. And so I think these little scripts are even more insidious sometimes than our narratives and stories. Sometimes we can see our narratives and stories so much better because they're huge and paradigmatic, and they're such a massive part of the infrastructure of how we see reality. That can be difficult if it's like a fish in water. If it's so much part of our reality, it can be tough to identify just because it's all consuming. But once we see it, there's evidence of it everywhere. Whereas these little scripts are so quick. They're like these quick little hits. And so they're a little bit more difficult to identify because they're so fast. And one of the things that had us thinking about scripts was we were talking with our friend Addison a couple days ago about the TV show, or the HBO show Westworld. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about Westworld. And if you haven't seen the first season, which is all that's been released at this point, if you haven't seen the first season and you want to, and you don't want to have any spoilers at all, my recommendation is that you finish listening to the rest of this podcast later at another time after you finished it. We're going to try not to give any spoilers, but there are a couple things that might be spoilers, so we just wanted to warn you of that. And then I'm also going to mention the Joss Whedon TV show Dollhouse and one of the episodes of Dollhouse. So again, if you don't want to have any of the episodes of Dollhouse spoiled for you, then you might want to listen to this podcast at a different time.
I haven't seen Dollhouse. Am I going to get spoiled on this one too?
Yeah, actually.
I'll take the hit for the podcast.
I do believe that Dollhouse is a pretty old show. So if you want to watch it and you haven't yet, then you best get to step in, I think.
All right. I have seen Westworld though, and that was a fantastic show. I mean, it's just like every episode I would go and just spend hours thinking about it. I couldn't get it out of my head. It was crazy.
What's weird is that I really liked Westworld. I really liked it, but if enjoyment is in credits of 100 units, I would get to like the 90 to 95 with Westworld. There was always like just one tiny little hair of something missing for me. I'm not sure what it is. So this is not a commentary on the show Westworld. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed the first season. And like I liked it. I just didn't fall madly in love with it. But I have been enjoying it, and I have been thinking about it. And one of the things that, again, the reason why we're talking about it is because we're talking about these concepts of these scripts. Is the premise of the show Westworld is
and
that...
you find this out within the first 5 minutes, so it's not too big of a spoiler.
This is not a spoiler. That the point of the show is that there is effectively an amusement park, an adult amusement park that is filled with what they call hosts, which are androids, really human-like androids. And you get to engage with them however you want to. And so it becomes an adult amusement park for iniquity. Effectively, like you get to have sex with whoever you want to, you get to kill whoever you want to, you get to rape whoever you want to. Like all the base human urges are able to be played out in this amusement park. And obviously it's very expensive, so it becomes a playground for the wealthy. And there's multiple different story arcs going on throughout the season. And some of the story arcs are about the hosts, and some of the story arcs about, guests that go to the park, to Westworld, which is like an Old West setting. And one of the story arcs is about artificial intelligence and how it is playing out in these hosts. is consciousness something that can be simulated? Can we create consciousness within AI? And at the end of every day, or at the end of every story arc that is written within Westworld, they wipe the memory of the hosts. And so without memories, they can't learn. And without learning, they can't be truly conscious. That's the argument. But it seems like some of the memories that the hosts have that are particularly sad or very painful, it seems like they're retaining parts of that data. And so some of the hosts start to feel like they're coming alive and starting to move with autonomy and with purpose and becoming their own, basically their own consciousness. The person who is the mastermind behind all of it, his name is Ford, it seems like that's sort of his end game. It seems like that's what he wants, is he wants them to become conscious. And at the same time, it feels like he finds this world that he's helped create to be relatively distasteful, though he understands it subsidizes all his research, which is in understanding greater consciousness within these hosts. So it's a very interesting, fleshed out concept and a very interesting TV show. But the thing that I found really fascinating is that it felt like the hosts, once they got a concept of consciousness, it was almost like a script. Even the things that felt like it was quote unquote off script, it felt like that these were scripts that they had to play out. It was like compulsion within them to finish playing out their script, whatever had been written for them. And until they finished the script out, it's almost like they couldn't focus or think about anything else. They had to get to the end of that particular script. And one of the characters was a host. Her name is Maeve. And she was a great example of this. It was like she had this thing she had to be doing. She felt compelled to do. And the question is was it her own consciousness that was seeking for that thing? Or was that written inside of her? Was that another script that had been written inside by somebody else and she was just fulfilling the script? So that's a big question in the middle of the season as well. But that made me think of an episode of Dollhouse, Joss Whedon's show Dollhouse, which is a very kind of a similar concept, although instead of having AI and hosts, they were real people, but they were completely controlled by, this higher authority that had them fulfilling missions for them and effectively getting information and being spies and all sorts of stuff. And there was an episode where all of the dolls, quote unquote, the dolls, the people that lived in there, were set free. And it seemed like they had done this huge prison break. And it felt like they were all getting autonomous again, and they were no longer under the control of of the people who ran the dollhouse. But what it ended up being at the end of the episode is that the orchestrators of all of this had actually programmed inside of them to have this prison break. And it's because as people, there is a fundamental foundational component inside of them that had a drive to make something happen. For the main character, the reason why she was there is because she was arrested for freeing animals that were being tested in laboratories. So the script that they wanted her to play out in that particular episode was that she was freeing all the other dolls, because that's a drive inside of her. There's a script running where she needs to believe that she is liberating other people or other creatures. And until that gets sated inside of her, she can't focus on the other things that she needed to do. And so they let her have that experience. They just let her have the experience of freeing all the other dolls. And so that sated that script running inside of her, that compulsion inside of her, so now she could focus on other stuff that they wanted her to do. And I thought that was super fascinating because I think we do that. I think we have these foundational, fundamental drives inside of us that turn into these scripts. And until the script is sated, until the feeling or the desire within us is sated, it's like we get fixated on playing it out. And in my relationships with other people and with myself, I've noticed sometimes I just have to let the script run. Sometimes I've just got to get to the end of that script and get the hit of whatever that emotion is, whatever that foundational core desire emotion, before I can move on to anything else. And in relationships, that means if I'm in conflict with another person, and now you have to take a meta perspective on these conflicts, but if I'm in a relationship with somebody and they are just really upset, or I've massively triggered them, or there's something big going on for them, one of the things I've started to do is, instead of trying to point out what I think is going on for them, or to try to, establish my position, or if I think I'm right and they're wrong, what I've started to do is just kind of back off and do what I can to facilitate their script. Not necessarily a story I disagree with, not necessarily a narrative or a paradigm I disagree with, but just that script. Just whatever it is that script, that emotional hit they need, just let them play that out so they get that hit and they back off on that fixation. And now they're at more of a neutral place. They're at an emotionally neutral place where they're not so insistent on getting whatever that hit is. Sometimes it's a feeling of righteousness. They have to feel right in the conversation. They have to feel right in the argument. And so just facilitating the script running and just letting them feel completely right sometimes calms them down to a place where now we can actually have a conversation.
What's weird is I'm trying to go the other direction and not let people play out their little scripts to get to that emotion, because I feel like it creates codependency. Like, it's a way to basically say, yeah, whatever is going on for you, that's totally cool. And that's the fear, I think, from my side, is to go ahead and let that script play out. Now I've created a situation where I'm enabling that person to continue that. If you didn't call me on the anxiety the other day, that could brew into massive codependency between us. But you didn't let me play that script out. You said, I'm not going to let you play the script out anymore. Stop doing this. This is not healthy for either of us. And I'm like, no, you can't take this away from me. And I'm all upset. But you did the right thing by not letting me play through that. Like, you called me on it. And that diffuses any ability for me to create that dynamic now where that's how I'm always, because I'm sure it'll only get worse. If I start going down the road of anxiety in really intense times, now I might pull on it when I'm not intense, just as a normal strategy, because it worked the first time around. So now when it's like proactive and I'm not under the gun, but man, it works so well, I'm not even thinking about it. I just pull on anxiety to motivate myself. Now I'm not finding healthy solutions. So the question I have is, isn't that enabling to people? Isn't that creating a codependency situation? Right? Like, that's kind of what my thoughts are.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's not, I think that's a good thought, because I don't believe that creating codependent relationships is ever the right thing to do. I think what it is a matter of timing. When the person is inside the script and they can't not be fixated on getting the hit at the end of that, that's not the time necessarily to disrupt it and try to force them out of the script.
When you're in the battle, that's not the time to talk about strategy. You got to get off the front lines, behind the enemy line, or behind your safe lines, and then you could talk about stuff that's actually needing to go on.
Exactly. So it's not a matter of never pointing out the script. I mean, that's what we're doing right now. Right now, we're even talking about the concept of it and pointing it out so that hopefully the listener will go, what are the scripts that I'm running? What are the things that I'm trying to figure out? So it's not an insinuation that the scripts are always okay, and even the ones that don't serve us, just let them go. I mean, in the moment when the script is playing out and the fixation is way more important than anything else. Like, in those moments, the fixation of getting the emotion is literally the most important thing on the planet to the person, usually. And it's not the time to try to wrestle that control away. But in the moment when they're calm, when they got the hit that they wanted, then after that happens and they're now in more of an open frame, I think it is more than appropriate, especially if you're in a relationship with the person and you're trying to create win-wins and you're trying to create simpatico and intimacy and all the other stuff that comes along with the relationship. I think it's totally the moment, or could be a moment, in which you could reflect back on it. And then I say that to you, I would hope the same would happen my direction. I would hope that you would be pointing out my scripts in a moment in which I could receive it the best as well.
I feel like I do that. I feel like I point out stuff. I just don't want to, I'm not here throwing you under the bus saying, and here's all your problems. I just wanted to say from my standpoint of the anxiety we're talking about, and it's very recent for us. But as far as things that I've been like, hey, that's not cool, I feel like I do that on a fairly regular basis. You're nodding in agreement, so I guess that's true.
I think we do what we can to prevent codependency between each other. It's pretty important to us to not allow. We try to give each other space for the stuff we're working on, and at the same time recognize that there are certain things that are unsustainable if they continue. And if something is unsustainable, I mean, that's why we talked about the anxiety thing, is because I'm like, you know what? I think I've hit critical mass on this one. I think I can't do any more anxiety as a motivation technique. And so it was more about how I'm not going to be able to handle that. So we're going to have to work something out.
Yeah. And it's just, and it was something so easy to fall back into, because I've been doing it my whole life when I'm under the gun. And so I think we're talking about scripts, right? Let's just summarize here again. We're not talking about like meta narratives or small narratives you're casting in your life, like how you see reality. These are almost like little scripts when things come up that you go to get yourself to an emotion, like a little drug hit, right? That's what we're talking about. And the idea here is to figure out a way to shift from the current script you're using once you recognize this. So the first step is awareness, finding out the places in life where you're doing this. And sometimes you may not see it in yourself. Someone else might have to point this out to you. So that's the first challenge, is finding where these are happening. And the second way is these scripts serve a purpose. You want to feel an emotion. And that emotion probably delivers you a result of some kind, whether that's the emotion itself or what that emotion means for you, either protection or getting something done or whatever it is, that because it serves a purpose, if you remove that script and that emotion, you're creating a vacuum now that you have nothing to replace it with. Anyone that tells you when you're addicted to something or you have a habit to do something, you can't just remove that thing from your life. You have to replace it with something more positive. Otherwise, you'll go back to that habit or that addiction, right? So just like that, with these scripts, we have to strategize and find ways to take, let's take my example. I'm fine usually, but whenever it comes down to the wire and we've got a lot of work that's backed up in Personality Hacker and the holidays are coming and I know I won't be able to work on stuff and I'm trying to close loops by the end of the year, instead of getting anxious, using my script to whip myself into an anxiety to fuel behavior and activity, I'm still using an emotion to motivate myself. That's not going to go away. I am a feeler. I use authenticity, which uses internal emotion to motivate myself. Is it a healthy emotion? And is it positive for the people around me? Anxiety, I believe, can be useful if you're running from like a grizzly bear in the wilderness, maybe, or if you're certain situations can be useful, but on a regular basis in daily life, in most Western societies, it's not as useful. So how can I, in my life, shift my script to deliver me an emotion maybe of excitement or anticipation to get these loops closed? That same emotion then of excitement or anticipation will fuel activity, but it's not being done in a negative, energy draining, low vibration way. And that's something that I'm working on now. Like instantly after that conversation, I've been journaling a couple days and figure out strategies when those scripts come up. And I even said to you, Antonia, help me when you see that going down that road, to just calmly be like, remember we talked about this. I asked you for this. You're not doing it on your own volition. When I'm going down that road, please bring that to my attention. And I'm going to stop and I'll probably get frustrated in the moment because it's so useful. And it's a pattern I've had for so long. I'll probably get a little annoyed and then I'll realize I asked you to call me on this. And that will enable me then to shift that emotion from the anxiety that's welling up, the little script that's getting me there, and maybe I'll change my thought patterns. I'll change the way that script is running to deliver more of an excitement or more of a, it's going to be okay feeling. I anticipate the result I want rather than getting anxious about the result I don't want. So it's more of a power toward or a motivation toward rather than a motivation away from. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a very wise piece of information to make sure that you aren't creating a vacuum.
Do you have any examples of scripts in your life that you've reworked or that you're trying to rework now in how you can do that? So one of the things, like as you're thinking about that, I'll just say that the script itself, what I have to change at the script level is the reason why I get to anxiety is I have all these stories in that little script, this little script running that if this doesn't happen, people are going to be upset with me. Maybe employees or team members are going to be upset. I won't have the work done on time, so deadlines will be missed, and then opportunities will be missed in the future. And so I use all of those little thoughts to get me to the emotion of anxiety, and then the emotion goes, okay, well, we got to get into action. So what I'm changing, instead of starting to think about team members being upset or frustrated that things aren't accomplished or that loops aren't closed, what I'm trying to say is, and then I won't quote unquote get to do what I want to do proactively or creatively. I say, hey, I can't wait to do what I want to do creatively and proactively. I get excited about closing these loops because it enables me to be creative. So that's the little twist in my mind I'm doing now, or I'm trying to do. It's going to probably take some work. I'm trying to shift to get excited about all the creativity that comes after these projects are done or after my to-do list is accomplished. So I set up a reward system now in my mind. Like I get rewarded to do this fun thing I'm looking toward. If I finish all the business taxes for the end of the year and close all those loops, which I can't stand doing. It's not in my wheelhouse. I just don't like it. But if I close all that, then I get to plan maybe a live podcasting tour next year where we get to go on the road and we get to go and meet people in real time, which gets me excited to meet audience members. It gets me excited to meet you listening. And that's something that gets me juiced up. And so I can shift that a little bit in the moment. Now that's going to take practice, I assume. I'm going to still fall down on this, but that's the way I'm going to shift that script for myself. Now you were talking about just letting scripts run through. That's for other people though.
Yeah, that's when you're in conflict with another person and you just don't want to beat your head against a wall.
Right.
Like just let them run their scripts. Like that's something that they need for the moment. So just, don't get between an addict and their medication at that moment unless you've been here before and you've talked about it. It's like you've got to create a little context around it, I think. You just let them finish it out and then you can address it. I think it's more about timing in that situation.
And I totally agree with that. I think that's what you have to do in that situation.
But I think when it comes to ourselves, so when we're not talking about another person and letting them run their script, when we're talking about ourselves and the actual extraordinary amount of power we have over ourselves and our narratives and our scripts. Again, I keep thinking of script as a strategy. The story is the thing that's trying to be protected, or the emotion is trying to be had. There's something much, much bigger going on, and the script is just the means to the end, or a means to get that thing quickly. Actually, I think it's more that these scripts are an attempt to get. It's like a shortcut. It's like an attempt to get a feeling you want. And instead of going about it the long, difficult road of making that happen in a more organic, natural, hard work sort of way, you just want to take the shortcut and get it quick, which is the same thing that drugs do for us, which is why people become addicts, is because you're seeking a sense of something. Maybe it's like a sense of positivity or a sense of well-being. And the drug will, for a time, sate that. And you don't want to go through all of the work of having to maybe fashion your entire life differently to make happiness the natural emergent. So you go to something that will get you there much quicker. Unfortunately, it's not sustainable and it becomes its own monster to feed. And I think scripts do that to us too. They're a strategy. They're a quick hit. But for me, I can, as you were talking about the professional one that you have around anxiety, I was thinking about one that's a personal one in our relationship, which is that I have stories running that our relationship has a shelf life. And that's based on a feeling of abandonment from, people in my life. I have a story that I've been working on for years and years and years, both working on it to create it and now working on it to dismantle it. And that is everybody who loves me leaves. Eventually you're going to leave too. Eventually you're going to find something that is not worth staying for. You're going to realize that I'm not worth staying for and you're just going to go. And so the story that I'm working on dismantling it's still there. I'm so much better around it, but it still pops up at times where I'm surprised when it makes its presence known, that story. And so while I'm working on the story at the same time, it's still going to be around. And when it comes up, when it flares up for me, I have scripts running that help me get to a place where I'm not fearing that as much, or I'm looking for a quick hit. So you and I will be talking. And one of the things that I believe I bring to the table is that I'm smart and I've got good thoughts and I'm a good problem solver and you enjoy how my mind works. That's one of the things I believe I bring to the table. And so when I'm feeling insecure in our relationship, like you might go now and I don't have any reason to believe you're about to go, I just start to fear that you're going to go. What I'll do is my script is to start accusing you of not listening to me. Everything I say, and this script has been popping up like crazy lately. And this is a new one for me. I think that's probably why I can identify it, is because it's a brand new one that's just shown up in probably the last 6 months, I would say.
Yeah.
And every time I start talking and you don't agree with me, you ask me a question and I'll offer a perspective and you don't immediately agree or validate my thoughts, then I'll say, well, you don't listen to me, or you never, or if I say something, you automatically dismiss it. You don't think I'm smart. You don't think I have anything to offer. You don't like any of my my problem solving thoughts. And I go into this little script that has you immediately refute that. And you let me know, no. I think you're brilliant. I think you're super smart. I love your ideas. Please continue. And you get apologetic and you're I'm so sorry I made you feel that way. And that script has been super handy for me in the last 3 to 6 months to get me to feel better about the big story, which is that you're going to go at any time.
So you have the feeling you're chasing is reassurance. That's the feeling you want. And the script is I create a situation where I get him to give me that feedback. I accuse him of something. Then he gives me the reassurance that everything's okay. Wow, that felt good.
Yeah.
And the next time you go there again, it's like, well, this is great. If he disagrees with me, all I have to do is throw the script out. He'll go on the defensive, quote unquote. He'll say, no, I love you. I want to be with you. What are you talking about? Oh, that feels so good. I feel so reassured that he's here. He's not going anywhere. He doesn't dislike me. He thinks I'm valuable. I feel good about that.
And it fits into my narrative because I want reassurance about the thing I bring to the table. Like my value about myself is in my problem-solving abilities. That's part of my self-definition. So it's not just reassurance that you love me and that you're going to stick around. It's reassurance that you are valuing the same thing I'm valuing, which is where I put a lot of chips. Like I put a lot of eggs in that basket. So I want to make sure that basket's good, right? And so it's specific reassurance about that particular value I bring to the table. And so the script is a quick little accusation that garners a big return that sates that part of my story and narrative. Super lazy. I mean, relationship-wise, it's like a super lazy thing. And I don't think I realized it until I just said it right now. You are hearing this for the first time come out of my mouth. I did not reflect on this or realize this until I'm saying it right now. So now I have to work on it. Now that I've let the cat out of the bag. Now I'm obligated to work on it because I'm saying it to who knows how many thousands of people. But yeah, I mean, that's basically what's going on for me. And so that's my recent script. And
Sure.
I think the reason why I can identify is because it's a new one. I am sure I have a gajillion scripts running that are ancient for me, right? Like 20, 30-year-old scripts running that I don't even know I'm doing. But I'm going to be making a commitment to myself. I'm making a commitment to myself to try to take a meta perspective and not just observe my stories and my beliefs and my mindset, which I've gotten pretty good at identifying. Now I'm going to start looking at the scripts. What are the tiny little scripts that are running, these little autoresponder sequences that are trying to get me those quick hits?
And that's a level where you actually have things that are happening outside of yourself that you can look at. We can look at that where I have anxiety, I start to articulate it. You have reassurance you need, you articulate it. And that's something you can objectively look at. I think even there's another level below that where it's the actual emotional processes happening for us underneath. And that's a whole nother level of sophistication when you get down to the level of postscript or prescript where the actual raw emotions are coming out. And the scripts are going to be hard enough for people, but I think that's the next level that I want to go toward is where I can begin to see the actual emotion itself come up and get in front of it. I know the self-help or the personal development author Esther Hicks talks a lot about this, about constantly being in control or ahead of the game on your emotions, not letting them take control over you, and not always being in control of them, but at least not letting them control you in that way. So that's kind of like my next. Maybe we'll talk about that in a future podcast, but. This is really, there's a couple things. So there's basically two fronts we came up with. You listening probably have little shortcut scripts you've been running, and some of them might be internal where you run the script to feel the emotion. Others you might push outward toward other people to give you that emotion back. And maybe you have this pattern of having the same fight with your lover or spouse and you watch it play out over and over again. It's probably a little script running that you're trying to get something, an emotion from that experience. You're trying to give your spouse or lover to give you something back, like what Antonia is talking about. Maybe it's reassurance. Maybe it's a good feeling of something. Whatever that is, you're probably creating a situation to get that back. And then there's the other thing where you're doing it for yourself. You're doing it internally and you're getting to that emotion yourself, and that may not be serving you. And then I guess there's a third part is people doing this toward you that you have nothing to do with. You're part of the dynamic on the other side. Maybe a friend of yours says something that triggers you every single time or gets you to say something every single time, but they're looking for their emotional hit. They're looking for their little script to run and get that back from you or your situation. So there's a couple fronts here that we're talking about. And I think when you were talking about another person, I think the two things that stand out is often we have to let that person just have that. It's really not our job, unless they've asked us, unless we're in that kind of relationship with them, to call them on it. Because when you're stuck in that little script to get that emotion, if you're in an addict type mindset, you are not going to be able to hear any kind of criticism, any kind of feedback about that. You're going to be too caught up in it. So if your friend's doing that to you and you try to call them on and say, hey, I think you're starting this fight with me every time so you can get this emotion from me, that's probably not going to be received well.
Well, if it's in the moment of the fight. Yeah. I mean, like if you have a friend who's doing it often, maybe it is good to say something about that.
But maybe do it at a time when it's not in the triggered moment. And that's really tough to bring up at a non-triggered moment.
Yeah, because it's kind of like, why are you inventing reasons to create conflict? And it's like, well, I'm actually trying to prevent future conflict.
Yeah.
But in the moment when they're looking for something, what I've tried to do is I try to identify what it is that they actually want. Like, what is the emotion they're actually wanting? And I think there's just like a handful of them. I think reassurance is a big one. I think ego defense, just knowing that I'm a good person, is a big one. Validation is a big one. Like, most of the emotions that we're chasing in these scripts are pretty basic ones. So there are oftentimes ways that you can help like get the person to that emotion that they're wanting in a much healthier way than they're trying to make it happen. But instead of like playing their game and like maybe getting caught up in whatever drama has been created through the script, like the drama that I create, like the whole, well, every time I talk, you invalidate everything I say. Like, that's the least healthy way that I can go about that. But if you know that I'm doing that in order to feel reassurance, you can just go, I love you, right? Like, you don't have to say all this stuff to make sure that I love you. I mean, I love you. I'm not going anywhere. And then you neutralize the script. Like, the script is not needed because the person got what they needed, that emotion or that reassurance or whatever it is that they're looking for, they got it. And now you can actually have a real conversation. And so I think that's more of what we mean. It's not that you don't call it. It's just like, try to do it with some sophistication. Try to do it without the accusation, especially knowing that we're all doing it all the time. And so there's really no make wrong here. It's just trying to optimize our experience.
Yeah, I think we all do this. This is not something like one person in the world in your life has struggled with and everybody else is perfect. I think all of us are doing it. It's how aware of it are we as people. So I think we talk about that, letting scripts run. We talk about potentially calling somebody on it, but it might be best to do it not in the moment because they're not going to hear it. An addict can't hear that they're addicted in the moment. It's very difficult unless you're having an intervention, literally. So that's one thing. But as far as you listening in your life, are you having these little scripts run to get to emotions that you want to feel? And some people are more in touch with wanting emotions than others. I believe we're always chasing an emotion. All of us, even the most hardcore thinker types of us, ultimately are chasing some type of an emotion. It's just how aware of it are we in our own lives. But we're all chasing good feelings or at least feelings that we feel serve us, whether they're good or not. We assume we need those feelings in some way. And those feelings could be anything from, looking down on other people for not being as intelligent, to anxiety, to anger, to love, to affection, to reassurance, whatever that is for you. And it probably ties into some of the deepest insecurities in your life, which is also difficult as you're looking at some of this. So I would say that if you're listening, the thing to look at is the awareness level right now. Where are you using little scripts and patterns? And I guess the best place to start is, where is the conflict in your life? That's probably where this is showing up the most. When you are having conflict and you're noticing patterns of conflict, maybe you're having the same fight over and over again with your lover or spouse, and you're like, man, why are we having the same fight? I don't understand. We keep fighting over the toothpaste tube. Why are we fighting over the freaking toothpaste tube? And then every single time my spouse is accusing me of not loving them. Like, what in the world is going on? This is a freaking toothpaste tube. And it's really about something much bigger than the toothpaste tube, obviously, right? It's not how you squeeze the toothpaste tube. It's what it means when you do that. And they're looking for some kind of a reassurance that you're listening and taking their value in, and you're squeezing the toothpaste tube in the correct way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's things in life as you're looking for conflict. I think you'll see these scripts pop up, and it's really tough to spot them. I think it's tough to spot them. And even if you're trained to spot them, it's still tough to spot them.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Well, and I think that's one of the reasons why presence work is so good. And if you haven't started a meditation practice, you might want to consider doing so. Meditation is a fantastic way to get inside what we call the watcher, which is the part of you that watches your ego do whatever it's doing. So there's a place you can get to where something is able to observe Antonia, what I call Antonia-ing. Like the whole dance of Antonia, all the stuff that Antonia does. There's a place I can get to where I can observe my ego do whatever it's doing. And if you can get to that space, then when you're playing out these narratives and stories, and then in a more fine-grained way, when you are running these scripts that support your narratives and stories, and then in an even more fine-grained way, if you can just work with the pure emotion without any scripts or stories and just observe them and get ahead of them, and continue to move towards the emotions you want to be feeling, the ones that serve you the best, the most sustainable. The best way to get there is to find that position of the watcher, so that when you're in all your stuff, you can just step back. You can just take a step back and observe the chaos happening without any judgment, without any make wrongs. Just watch yourself do whatever you're doing. And when you can get into that space regularly enough or often enough, when you're in that moment of argument or conflict, you might not be able to expect the other person to do this, but you can yourself train yourself to step back, which is what you were describing, Joel. You were describing being in that anxiety, wanting that anxiety, being in that script, and me pointing out that might not be the best thing, and then you doubling down on it, and then all of a sudden, it was a thing of beauty. All of a sudden, watching you just go, you know what? Maybe you're right, and just like step back. Yeah. And just observe the thing happen. It's kind of amazing how you do that, actually. And when you get to a certain place where you can, even in the eye of the storm, step back and watch it all play out, then that's the ideal. But you can train yourself to get there. You don't just get there. You don't just have that ability. I don't know anybody who just shows up with that ability. You have to train yourself to get there. And I think meditation and presence work is a great way to facilitate, like build the tool of being able to do that, and then watch your scripts work and watch your narratives happen.
Yeah, for me, it's basically been the end point of, if I keep going down this road, what's the end result? What am I actually trying? Why getting anxious and then defending it? What am I trying to accomplish here? Is it worth damaging this relationship? Is it worth causing all this anxiety to hold on to this thing that I want? Like, what's the point? If it leads to unhappiness between us and maybe not effective business practice, where I'm leading an entire organization through anxiety, geez, that's a horrible place to go. And that's the ultimate conclusion. I could see that going down that road. And I'm like, she's right. This is not a healthy way to be a leader. This is not a healthy way to accomplish things. And it was a great calibration experience for me to see that reflected back to me. What do you think? You've been listening to this. You most likely have had these little script moments in your life. Maybe you've had some fights that are recurring on a regular basis. Maybe you realize that you're chasing certain emotions. Maybe you see something posted about a political movement or something, and you get righteously indignant when you see it. And you're like, man, I'm really addicted to that emotion. I'm looking for ways to get indignant based on things posted online, or these little scripts are popping up because I'm looking for these emotional hits. And I think I'm addicted to these emotions. I mean, maybe that's your experience, or maybe you figured this out. Maybe you're light years ahead of what we're talking about, and you're able to almost sit on the mountaintop meditating, getting hit by canes, and you're fine, and like nothing bothers you anymore, triggers you at all, and you've been through the storm. And love to hear that experience too. But we want to hear from you. What is your experience in this? What are your questions? You can leave a comment or ask a question directly below this show over at personalityhacker.com. There's a place where we can get discussion started around this. And we also want to invite you over to facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK, and joining the community. There's a like minds community of growing every day. More and more people are joining. People that want to understand themselves and grow themselves, reach for something better, become the best version they can be in this short life we get on this planet.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you are feeling particularly giving, a gift you could give to us is leave a rating and review on iTunes.
Yeah, and share this podcast with friends of yours. Maybe somebody would love to hear and be a part of this discussion every week. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.